Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting back into X-Force, to where at this point with what we've seen throughout House of X and even Dawn of X, with Charles and the others doing like whatever it takes in order to get the win, and even at times things that may be questionable, and it's like here in X-Force that whole concept has just been cranked up to the max. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so when it comes to X-Force as a team, we've kind of talked about how like the structure is set up, and we've often got this analogy of them being Krakoa's CIA, of which they very much are. And it's like with this, aside from handling matters that the X-Men would just publicly take care of, it's like now more than ever, they need X-Force to handle the matters which are still crucially important, but even still they don't necessarily need the name of Krakoa just stamped all over it. Because when we start to see more of the things that they're getting involved with, then we start to understand like, okay, well if the United Nations, if they had caught wind of Krakoa poking their finger in all these different matters, then this could easily just start another world war. So for that reason, even with doing questionable missions, on top of that they then had to take questionable actions in order to cover their tracks. So now, much like how we'd seen this play out with Charles Xavier and along with Magneto soliciting the help of Emma Frost and making the votes go in their favor in order to make Krakoa a sovereign nation, well that was nothing compared to some of the stuff we're about to talk about X-Force doing. And so now the way this works with this team operating under Charles and Magneto of course, but under them everyone here answers to Beast, which is super intriguing. And it's not like he's never led before or he's incapable of doing so, because he's very capable. But along with that, we know that there's this conflict there with him being someone who's usually more passive, but even still he's the one who has to lead this team and make the tough call. But as Beast would describe, like his working relationship or even just the collaboration of this whole team, it's very much like an orchestra. And at this time, while the field teams in Terra Verde and Beast and Sage are over at the point, he even gives us the breakdown of how like the different members are like different musicians or even instruments, with Kid Omega much like your violin, which I would imagine with plenty of staccato. And there's Domino, who's like a saxophone, Sage, who can really just be any instrument she needs to be, with serving the purpose of creating different harmonies. And then there's Wolverine, who's just like the beating drums and crashing cymbals, which sounds pretty simple on the surface, but it's like, what's an orchestra without that? But then you have Jean, who's like your versatile cello, which can hit notes that are extremely high or even extremely low. But all in all with this, Beast, he is the conductor. He controls the pacing, and when Sage collects information, he has to go through it and decide what they're gonna do with it. And when it comes to the means of protecting Krakoa and seeing their goals come to fruition and protecting many of the secrets which fall in between, if there has to be bribes, it's done. If there's wiping memory that needs to be done, consider it done. If a laboratory needs to be burnt down and made to look like an accident, then it's up to him to make that call and for X-Force to execute. And so now for a little backstory on this recent mission, Charles Xavier had recently went down to Terra Verde to convince the president to sign a treaty, and with doing so he was accompanied by Black Tom Cassidy, who, keep in mind, he took the recent assassination of Charles Xavier pretty personal. And while they were here in a different country for a similar purpose, he was very adamant about not letting history repeat itself. But also while they're here, the president, he announced that for whatever reason he had declined to sign the treaty, and as soon as that happened he was attacked. And at the time no one really knew who these individuals were, with them stating that the mutants aren't in charge and neither is the president. And even when they initiated this attack, the president wasn't seriously harmed, but rather he only had a few scratches and scuffs. And in the case of Charles Xavier, he wasn't harmed at all. And as Black Tom would describe it, like with him of course protecting Xavier first, but right after that him telling them if they know what's good for them they leave, Black Tom then takes the news back to Beast like, yeah, they ran because they was afraid of me. And Beast kind of hits him with the, yo, that's crazy. But also at the time, even with still hearing this heroic tale, Beast still had his suspicions of not only who or what these people were, but what was the true reason of them coming there. And as it turns out, with Sage examining the footage, they then come to find out that as it appears, these creatures were actually after the president's son, which most likely means that they wanted some type of leverage on the president and force his hand for whatever reason by threatening him with his son's safety. And it's for this reason that both Beast and Jean go to see the president themselves to get more information on who these creatures are and perhaps what's their motive. But for President Kokum, the very arrival of Beast and Jean spooked him, because with the kidnapping of his son, he was informed that if he had reached out for any outside help, then his son would be killed. So when they arrived, he was just like, no, get out of here, I cannot talk to you. But of course with Jean there, the talking part isn't necessarily needed, because much like we've seen her do with others before, she just reaches into his mind and pulls the information that they need. And as it turns out that these creatures that had attacked him, they were once Teleflora scientists who had been infected by their work, and though it's unclear who their leader is at this time, this plant-based technology is something that the president has been well aware of for a long time, because for quite some time, President Cockham and the scientists of Terra Verde, they have been developing Teleflora technology, which works a lot like nanotech, but only with organic materials, but ideally its programming could work on a cellular level. And with doing so, not only would this breakthrough help Terra Verde's economy, but would also create this microorganism solution that could enter bodies on a cellular level, cure diseases, amongst many other benefits. But as you may have guessed it, when Krakoa came out with their drugs, which succeeded pretty much overnight at doing what Terra Verde was trying to do for years, this then caused Terra Verde to lose a number of funding, both in investors and in potential customers, because the nation of Krakoa had figured it out first, which is partially the reason why the president did not want to collaborate with Charles Xavier and sign the treaty. But after this encounter, that's something that would soon change, because once Beast and Jean get the information that they need, he tells Jean to wipe the mind of everyone here except for the president, in doing so mainly so that the president knows that when this is all said and done, that he is in Krakoa's debt. And so from here, jumping to the next day, which is pretty much where the narrative started. But at this point with X-Force, when they're pretty much ambushed by these Teleflora scientists, it's not only here where Beast realizes that they've weaponized this technology, but he's also come to the realization that these enhanced beings are on par with Omega Sentinels, and for that reason he has to treat them as an equal threat, because if this breakthrough is either sold or stolen, it could also lead to the extinction of the mutant race. And if you really think about it, like if the Sentinel program got a hold of the Teleflora developments and research, like they could practically turn the whole planet into the next mother mold, and at that point there's no combating that. But this is just an example of the things that Beast has to foresee when he has to make those tough decisions. And along with that, because Sage has suggested that they leave no witnesses, which is why Beast had Jean wipe the other minds back at the president's mansion, but with that, in addition to Hank's evaluation of these dudes turning themselves into weapons which are on par with Omega Sentinels, Beast then gives the order for Jean to take these dudes out, which initially she does argue because one of the main Krakoan laws is kill no man. But Beast very much urges Jean to realize that these guys are on the same path, although it be organic, to developing Omega Sentinels, to developing Nimrod, just as any other engineer with mechanical parts. And with that, in the moment Jean does what needs to be done, but even still it doesn't mean that she fully agrees with it. But what we actually come to find out when she catches up with the others is that the president's son actually staged his own kidnapping, and with doing this his motivation was to force his father's hand, because he had believed that his father had given up on the research for Teleflora. And when X-Force figures this out, they of course take him down and they bring him in. But even with this, Beast admits that Hadwin, the president's son, that he was right, because their research with Teleflora, it had made its strides, it was capable of being an alternative to Krakoan medicines, and it eventually became a successful way to weaponize their bodies. But because this poses more of a threat rather than any benefit, Beast then makes like the craziest decision, because he reprograms Hadwin's enhancements to instead be identified to his body as an infection. And I get it, Hadwin had to be stopped, which in the eyes of his father, the president, it seemed like, okay, well X-Force, we helped you and we found your son, but unfortunately it was just too late. These scientists experimented with him, it went left, and unfortunately there's nothing we can do. And if you think about it, it was either that or expose Hadwin, which would have then destroyed the country's economy. And so it's like there's no way this could have turned out in Hadwin's favor. But even still with that, it may. Because what Beast had thought to be a permanent solution with literally turning this dude into a vegetable, and with doing that burning down his lab in hopes of putting an end to Teleflora, but when this was done, Hadwin had actually broken down and reconstructed, and with doing so, he is still out there on the loose. Like the dude just straight up turned into a smoothie and just dripped out the window. And though this is something that is not going to be like your immediate threat, but even still, much like what we had seen with horticulture, I believe that Hadwin is a problem that we'll see later on. And if not a problem in addition to horticulture, then aside from that, I would say that horticulture is probably the only group who could stop this guy, with the horticulture bomb, which as of right now is targeted at Krakoa. But real quick, just want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for your support, and for anyone else who would like information on how to support the channel, I got links below, or you can head over to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Man, X-Force is up to some shady business. But also I want to add, like, for that moment in the future when Hadwin comes back, like, aside from Horticulture having the solution to stop him, it may instead turn out to be Black Tom Cassidy, or Black Tom may even be the solution for Horticulture. Either way. But let me know you guys' thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.